Welcome to the Hidden Orchard podcast, a radical exploration of spirituality, science, and the Bible from a Jewish perspective. Each week we'll look at a new topic and dive deep into the texts that inspire and enrich our lives. So whether you're a seasoned expert or just curious about a topic, there's something for everyone. So sit back, relax, and we'll get to today's episode in a bit. But first, if you haven't done so, visit thehiddenorchard.com and subscribe. It's free, and you'll receive access to content and weekly emails. There you can also subscribe for a paid membership and get access to everything on the site and be the first to hear about online study opportunities where you can meet and interact with other people on the journey. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and if you have an idea for a topic, reach out to me at thehiddenorchard.com. Now let's get to today's episode. Paul's use of the phrase one new man in Ephesians 2 has led many to read his words as a break from Jewish and Gentile distinction, a celebration of universalism and the disillusion of covenantal uniqueness. But for Paul, a trained Pharisee, experienced in the interpretive traditions of Second Temple Judaism, there might be another clue from rabbinic thought that he had in mind when he wrote these words. And this idea challenges the popular interpretation. We'll explore why this tradition plays a major role in Paul's worldview, both eschatologically and practically. And we'll look at some key sources from the Jewish tradition to reframe this often misunderstood idea. Rather than erasing Jewish-Gentile distinction, Paul's phrase, the one new man, builds upon a deeply Jewish framework, the mystical and midrashic understanding of Adam and the messianic redemption. So in order to understand this idea, we need to have a little bit of familiarity with the midrash around Adam's creation. As we've explored, midrash is an important tool to understand the apostolic writings. Midrash are the interpretive traditions that uncover hidden meanings in the biblical text, often imaginative and theological. One recurring concept at the forefront of Paul's teachings is the tradition surrounding Adam, known as Adam HaRishon, or the first Adam, in Jewish thought. This concept is featured throughout all levels of Jewish hermeneutics, Pardes, and is deeply connected to the role of Messiah. We see this concept emerge many times, but one place is in 1 Corinthians 12, where Paul describes the community as a unified body, the body of Messiah. This diverse group of people comprise different parts of the body, and all are supposed to work in harmony. This is a really interesting idea, but it's one found in the Midrash, as we'll see in a second. Paul portrays a reintegration of humanity back into a kind of wholeness, a tikkun, for the aftermath of Adam's miscalculation and the separation of the nations at the Tower of Babel. Paul sees room for both Jews and Gentiles in this believing body. In Ephesians 2, Paul encourages and builds up the Gentile audience in his letter, reminding them of the life of paganism they left behind. Paul seeks to assure them they have indeed been included in the commonwealth of Israel, though without the formal and still valid process of Jewish conversion. This distinction is reflected in Ephesians as Paul maintains the language of us, Jews, and you, the Gentile God-fearers. In this letter and others, Paul recognizes them as a new category of Gentiles among the Jewish communities. Though he doesn't consider them Jews, he doesn't exactly consider them to be among the predominantly pagan Gentile world they once belonged to, and we've covered this idea in another article as well. For Paul, these distinctions remain an important part of his expectation of the Messianic era. That is, Jews and Gentiles standing side by side in the service of God. And we can see this chiefly in his letter to the Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 7, 17 through 18. This idea in itself is also rabbinic in origin. But for many who come from a Christian influence, the idea of distinctions might seem counterintuitive to the universal message of the gospel. However, distinction is quite logical, as each group has a unique role and a unique relationship with the commandments of the Torah, and this is demonstrated in Acts 15. Paul's language indicated that all of these groups were already in the synagogue communities when he arrived and began to teach there. For example, in Acts 13, upon arriving at the synagogue in Antioch, Paul says, "Men of Israel, and you who fear God." Here he's talking to Jews, the men of Israel, and you who fear God. These are the Gentiles, also known as God-fearers. In Acts 13:26, he adds a little more nuance. He says, brothers, sons of the family of Abraham, and for those among you who fear God. Now, in this example, we see brothers who are Jews, sons of the family of Abraham, B'nai Avraham, which is a nickname for converts in Hebrew, and those among you who fear God, Gentiles. So all of these groups were already present in these congregations. For Paul, this was a picture of the Messianic kingdom, Israel and the nations together, distinct, each with their own roles to play. So now that we understand that Paul maintained distinctions, we need to redefine what he meant by the phrase, one new man. In this, the Hebrew word Adam literally translates as man. So we can interchange the word man with the word Adam. In Paul's Midrash, he often compares the first Adam, the Adam created during the week of creation. Following this, Messiah is connected to the idea of the second Adam, or the second man. We see this language in 1 Corinthians 5:17, when he says, the first man was of dust of the earth. The second man is of heaven. The text could actually be read as, Adam HaRishon was of the dust of earth. The second Adam is of heaven. And many are familiar with this idea already. Paul uses this framework to compare the destruction caused by the first man, Adam HaRishon, to the restoration brought by the second man. In the Talmud, we see a similar idea to that in 1 Corinthians 12. The tradition shares that the body of Adam was a composite of the dust of all the nations. Tractate Sanhedrin 38b says, Adam's torso was fashioned from dust taken from Babylonia. His head was fashioned from the dust taken from Israel, and his limbs were fashioned from dust taken from the rest of the lands of the world. So in this idea, in exactly the same use as Paul in 1 Corinthians 12, we're seeing how Adam was comprised of all the nations of the world, and the hands and the limbs and the head and so forth. It's the same idea we see in 1 Corinthians. Now, this is going to be the baseline for what Paul uses when he talks about one new man. And it's the nations who are being, once again, formed into one new man, and that is the reconciliation through the life and the death of Jesus. Now, with its emphasis on the soul, the Zohar expands upon this idea, teaching that not just the body, but all of the souls of humanity were also a part of Adam before his sin in the garden, and in fact before his creation in the physical world. Thus, the ultimate redemption is that all of humanity, body and soul, will be reintegrated into a unified whole. This is the job of Messiah, and this is essentially what we are talking about at the resurrection of the dead and the world to come. To me, this is what Paul is alluding to, that Paul would use these teachings that he was familiar with and base this upon his belief that Jesus was helping to reconcile the world in the form of the second Adam. We can see this belief in Ephesians 2:15 and 16. Now that we understand the pieces and what we're looking at, we'll read this verse again. That he might create in himself one new man, one new Adam, in the place of two, so making peace, and might reconcile us both to God in one body through the cross, thereby killing the hostility. So notice that Paul again uses the word us, both, right? He's clarifying that it's Jew and Gentile who are being reconciled back into this harmonious existence in this new Adam. Now, this is a great use of the Midrash, provided someone's familiar with it. However, when taken out of context, the conclusion drawn over the centuries is that a new man exists, some kind of a third option that's neither Jew nor Gentile. However, practically this assumption has largely sought to make a casualty of the Jewish people, expecting them to assimilate into Gentile Christian culture, and however it appears and manifests. This unfortunate interpretation walks the Jewish people away from their covenantal responsibilities, their heritage, and their role in the future redemption. Thus says the Lord of hosts, in those days 10 men from the nations of every tongue will take hold. They will take hold of every Jew by a corner of his cloak, and say, Let us go with you, For we have heard that God is with you. Zechariah 8:23. So in the end, we see Paul is using familiar midrash, and he's repurposing it to his time period in the idea that Jesus is now the second Adam, and the distinctions of Jew and Gentile remain, and that both of these groups are grafted into a greater meta figure known as the second Adam. It's very deep. I encourage you to visit the website, thehiddenorchardproject.com. We have many of these side topics you can explore further. And as always, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. That's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed this topic. Remember, you can find more information at thehiddenorchard.com. If you liked what you heard, please leave a review and share this podcast with your friends. We don't really engage in marketing, so it's word of mouth and references like that really help spread the word. Also, I want to say thank you to those who subscribe to the site and those who support the Hidden Orchard Project financially. Without you, it wouldn't be possible, so thank you. Thanks to everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.